Wow, what great photographs and what a CV. Welcome, Paul Colley. Could you tell me more about your RAF career, please, Paul?
Yeah, certainly, Stuart. It spans 37 years, so these will be severely edited highlights. I started life as an apprentice technician. I did an apprenticeship for 3 years. I was an engineer at the start of my career, but then crossed over to the flying branch. I flew Phantoms in the Cold War, Tornadoes in the slightly hotter wars. Then I ended up in the central policy area as the director of a strategic think tank. That was the last job that I did, and I actually left early, would you believe, in order to pursue this second career. And that's not because I wasn't enjoying what I was doing. I think I had an absolutely fabulous career with some incredible people, and I think that's what we all remember, isn't it? The people that you worked with, without a doubt.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we do rate photography very, very highly here at the Royal Photographic Society, so we can understand you leaving early, Paul. Tell me, you mentioned later on about collaboration. How important is working with a team to you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a fact, actually. I did some research once when I was the director of this think tank that showed, beyond doubt, that working in a team is always more powerful than the individual. So if you have the right team, of course, so if you have a diverse team with different backgrounds, different expertise, they'll always 100% come up with a better solution to complex problems than you will, even if you're the brightest individual in the room and you're that arrogant to think that. Because we all know different things. We all see, even if we're all trained in the same way, we often see things in a different way. So teams were just always part of my life. We value individual performance and the services enormously, but actually teams are what make everything work, and it doesn't matter what your career is.
That's a really, really interesting response. Thank you. Now, you mentioned photography, moving on to photography, and that's what we're here to talk about. So you enjoy your garden?
Yes, I do. I mean, I've had to because of recent depredations of the lockdown. I've become much more familiar with my back garden than normal. So here we'll talk later about astrophotography, but this was part of me not going crazy, was giving myself a serious project to get on with. So I've started some astro work more of later. But I've also been looking at birds, and we'll look at the next slides. These are not particularly stunning images. You know, natural history photographers would knock me into a cocked hat. But actually, keeping up with animal behavior, I photograph fish and underwater, and there are similarities in behavior. So I think keeping on the ball with animal behavior and anticipation and all that goes with it has been very important for me, so that when I get back into the rivers and the oceans, I'll still have those fingertips skills, you know, ready to use. So that's just been mucking about in the back garden, but with a serious purpose, really, to keep my skills alive.
To keep in there, yeah. I mean, you do a lot of travel, don't you? Where is this next image, and what do you do there? Can you explain a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, this is more what I'm about, really, and we'll talk about conservation later. But this is Misul, which is a place in Indonesia, a very remote spot. And it's a very important thing about this image is that this is a beautiful coral garden, but if you were there 10 years ago, this place was wrecked. It had been overfished, all the fish stocks taken out. This was actually a shark finning station, would you believe? And they'd trash the corals, trash the fish stocks. And somebody had the foresight to say, look, let's put in place some legal instruments, because all the fishermen moved on and lost interest once everything had been raided and broken. And for 10 years, they created this no-take zone and a well-protected, well-policed reserve. And I went there 10 years later because, as we'll find out later, I have a huge interest in marine protected areas, and that's what I do a lot of work in to help support them. So this is one of the best marine protected areas I've ever dived in, and it was an absolute joy. I mean, we haven't got time to go into all the imagery that goes with this, but it was stunning, absolutely stunning underwater, but recovered. If you leave nature alone, she'll generally repair things if you give her the right breathing space.
I know from talking to you, conservation is very important. Can you tell me about this motorbike, please? Where was this?
Yeah, this is nearer to home. This is the Red Sea. I do a lot of work in the Red Sea, and it's where I learned to really upskill myself in underwater photography. But this shipwrecks abound all over the world. I think there's something, UNESCO say there are something like 14 million shipwrecks. I think it's of that order of magnitude anyway. And this is a very interesting one. It's called the Thistlegorm. It's probably one of the most dived wrecks in Egypt. And it was sunk by a couple of German bombers in the Gulf of Suez during the Second World War in 1943. And it went down with all its cargo on board. These motorbikes and aircraft wings and ammunition and all sorts of other things were destined for troops fighting in Italy and North Africa. And it went down beautifully packed with all this stuff on board, and it's still there to this day. And I just thought it was such a cool image to go and photograph a motorbike all those decades later with a lovely raccoon butterfly fish swimming around it.
You kind of expect those tyres to have perished, but is that something to do with the actual...
I don't know. No, well, actually, water preserves. When you take oxygen away, I mean, it's more the metal that survives better, provided you remove the oxygen. There are other things that happen that cause nature to take back things, but much more slowly. But no, the rubber and plastic survives forever, pretty much. Of course. Yeah. And then in Egypt as well, I photograph things like this. So this is a moray eel, and we go on to the next image. These are just typical images. This is a little damselfish full of character, only about the size of your hand. And if you look at the next one, this is a really interesting moment. This was an award-winning image. It's a matter of timing. This is one of the critical moments. This is very fast action. And I was diving to the limits of my depth with the gas that I had on my back at the time. And it was one species of barracuda on the left, a great barracuda, hassling some yellowfin barracuda. And I don't know if it's predation or territorial, but it was just a moment with my colleague at the other end, missing the action, getting it all tail on, and it all came towards me. But it's just one of those lovely moments when I managed to get the moment. And I think sharks have been a big part of my life because they're demonized in many ways. They are not mindless killers. You know, I have to say this. We're the folks that do the killing. We kill still 100 million sharks per year. So by the time I finish speaking, about another 11,500 of these will have been killed in the ocean, and they're taken out for their fins to make a tasteless soup, mainly for the Oriental market, but also for other traditional medicines. So I've done a lot of work to try and undemonize the shark and really get the message out that you know, we need to look after these. And this is an oceanic whitetip, and if you look at the next image, this is one, you know, it came right onto the camera. It's actually touching the dome in front of me. And sharks just, they're not aggressive. This is not aggression. This is just curiosity. And you can see the nictating membrane on its eye. But it wants to know what I am. And once it found out what I was and that my camera wasn't really that food, it just moved on very calmly. What not to do if you ever do encounter a shark underwater is keep eye contact with it, because it understands that that's a predatory function, keeping eye contact. If you turn tail and go for the surface, it will normally trigger a response. Lions are the same. If you face them down, you have a chance of winning the standoff. Sharks are not mindless killers. They're gentle creatures, and they're disappearing at an alarming rate, I'm sad to say.
Those figures are quite amazing.
And then there's the small stuff at, you know, the other end of the scale. I just find it's just as much fun. This is a macro shot. This little cheeky little blenny is about the size of your little finger, and but just got the right expression. They rotate their eyes independently, but he managed to yawn. It looks like a bit like he's smiling or talking to me. And I think it's quite an engaging image, and one that suits the central crop because of the symmetry. And it's just inside a beautiful piece of hard coral. But I love the small stuff as well as the big stuff. And then I think this nicely encapsulates these two images, what I'm trying to do with my work, which is tell stories, particularly in the context of conservation. On the left, in fact, the RPS very generously gave me a gold medal for this in a print competition one year. But it's really a story. It's my story. When I was young, I remember rock pooling with my father and being shown starfish and blennies and all the things and crabs. And I was responsible for a few that expired before their time by putting them in buckets. But this is my niece, and I just wanted to recreate that story about, you know, the beauty and the wonder of, you know, learning about underwater life. And the one on the right is more contemporary. That was taken a few years ago, the one on the left. The one on the right, these split level images, as they're often known, half in water, half underwater, I've been trying to convey what water birds do by looking at both their beauty above and below water. This is the natural behavior of a mute swan foraging on a riverbed.
Wow, those figures you mentioned earlier on were just amazing. 11,000 in the time that we're sat here. But these images here, of course, any of us could really wander down to our local park and have these facilities, but you've created something really marvelous and different out of these. Can I ask what sort of equipment you're actually using to shoot these?
Yeah, I think this image on the left anyway, shows the traditional way of taking underwater photographs. And it's a commercial housing that you just wrap around a normal camera. So in this case, I think that's my Nikon D4 at the time. I have both operate full frame and crop sensor for different types of work underwater. But you buy commercial housings to protect them from the pressure and the water, most obviously. And then the things you see on the outside are float arms and strobes or lights, special lights that will, of course, work underwater. So that's the traditional way. But the swan image was taken with a housing I made myself and remote control. And I've done a lot of remote control work, and this will come out, I think, later in the talk. But this is the traditional equipment, but I have built a lot of my own equipment, mainly for remote control in rivers and other wildlife contexts. And the beauty of remote control is you can get back from the wildlife and not disturb it, and its behavior becomes more natural.
That's amazing. So far we've been looking under the water surface, but let's look upwards. You also photograph space.
Yeah, yeah, I alluded to it earlier. This is really born out of the frustration of lockdown. And I wanted a serious project to keep me busy in the back garden. But I had a fascination. It came from my back project, so there is a link. And I was trying to create better quality backgrounds at night, both images of the moon, of stars in particular, the Milky Way, that sort of thing. And once you get into this, I just warn you, if you want to dabble in this, you'll soon get your fingers in a very painful mangle. And it's the equipment mangle, because if you thought regular photography soaks up your budget, this stuff is crazy. But this is a star tracker in the back garden. I just thought it'd be a fun image to do, take a star rotation image, because of course the Earth rotates, therefore you get relative movement of the star. So this is something like a 2-hour exposure to join up the movement with the pointing at Polaris or right behind. But on the mount here, I've got a regular, it's a 600mm wildlife lens and a regular camera. But this equipment tracks the stars very accurately. So you can expose on a group of stars for up to 3 hours, which is what I'm typically doing.
Wow, that is so clever. So let's just have a look at some of your space images. Paul Colley in space. That's fabulous, thank you. The level of detail that you've been discussing tonight, the background to the photographs has been really amazing, Paul. How important is research to you? Is it a method of informing your image making, or does it actually work the other way round?
I think it informs. So I always start a serious project these days with research. And I think I'm right at the beginning of this astro thing. So I don't think you're seeing anything incredible from me yet, but you know, I intend to, within a couple of years, really work this up. But this is an early image, you know, whereas looking at the planets with a regular camera, which it's a massive crop to see that. But I was astonished to see the rings of Saturn for the first time on a regular camera, and it just really fired me up, and that's when I really thought I'm going to do this seriously. But then the image on the right there in the circle, that's a sort of research. I was just wondering how I could show the planets moving through the sky and the stars in a different way. So it's a combination of long and short exposures to get the little dots of the planet's head. So it's a germ of an idea, and it all came from research into the speed of rotation of the Earth, and a lot of work that really good astrophotographers have done before me, but me trying and do something different, because we can all do derivative photography and do the same thing as other people and do it to a high standard. And there's value in that, in learning your craft and your trade. But I want to do different things. I think novelty has a very high value in the arts. And if you do something different, you're going to do well. So the research gets me into the concepts, the ideas, the possibilities, and then start trying to get a little bit out of the box. And that's where I am. I'm at the start of the Astro project, brimming with ideas, I have to tell you. So I hope in a year or two I'll be able to show you something a bit more special than these images.
Wow, it's really amazing. I'd just like to stop briefly for a moment, because one of the things is that I've realised is that Paul is extremely modest. You're coming out with some amazing things, but I've actually had to research all of that. Paul kept very quiet about all these achievements. You've also bought some new kit. What is this, Paul?
Yeah, this is now up to the elbows in the mangle, but actually this is a telescope. So I have bought a telescope. I want to look into deep space and have a look at distant galaxies millions of light years away. And the red things on the back of this scope are astro cameras, specifically designed to do the job. The most important thing is they're mono cameras, black and white, and they're cooled. So the sensor is cooled to down below -20, which makes them extremely sensitive to those very faint photons coming from millions of light years away. And then there's a filter wheel there, so you have to photograph if you approach it this way in different color bands, and also very narrow filter bands. So looking in hydrogen alpha bands, sulfur, oxygen, red, green and blue to get the colors and the luminance filters as well. So this is starting now, just now, and this was only days ago, finally piecing everything together as I've learned how each bit works. And it's just ready to go. So I'm going to take very soon what they call first light. It's when you open the new camera up on a telescope to your first object. So I'm really, really excited about this project. It's just at the point of going forward into creating some potentially exciting images.
Incredible. I don't really know where you find all the time. And of course you do other things as well. Let's take a slight break for 63 seconds of Paul Colley without a camera in his hand. Beautiful. That was you practicing for your grade 4 piano. Now, Afzal Ansari, one of the things that amazes me about the RPS is the bank of clever people. And Afzal was one of your assessors when you put your fellowship in, and he told me recently that he worked with bats in Kampala's Bat Valley in Uganda. Paul, can I ask you to read a couple of statements from your fellowship synopsis, please?
Yeah, so this was my approach to the RPS once I'd sort of formulated properly my ideas. And I said that the proposed research paper will articulate new ways currently in development, because the project was beginning, to photograph free-flying wild bats at night. It seeks to overcome the restrictions imposed by wildlife protective legal frameworks and the high technical demands of photographing small mammals that move erratically at high speed in low light conditions and occasionally in complete darkness. So the nub of the problem was there is a restrictive legal framework, and it's not to circumvent that framework, it was to work within it. How do you work within that? But also overcoming these technical demands for bat photography, which were extreme.
And of course, that was what your fellowship research paper was all about, creating and developing these techniques. Could you talk us through these next few images, please? How did you specifically create these?
Yeah, so I tried low light techniques. So this is low light, and the bit about the restrictive framework is you cannot disturb the bats. They are protected species. All 18 species of bats in the UK are protected. And this photo was taken with high ISO, low light, and with a laser beam. And I use lasers a lot because they're very fast response times. And it's designed as a bat photo trap. So as the bat crosses through the laser beam, which it doesn't see because it's red, and that's outside the bat's eye range, and it will trigger the flash. And in many of these photos, the shutter is pre-opened because, as with this one, the camera cannot react quickly enough. The best speed I could get out of my camera was in the order of 150 milliseconds. You need to be single-digit millisecond response to get images like this, because these bats are traveling at 11 meters a second. And this image brought it all together for me. This is infrared now, and this is invisible to the bats completely, and in fact to the human eye, but also using laser triggering techniques and long exposures, and in this case a double exposure as well to get the background habitat as well as the flight paths of the bat. And this was I was really lucky that as the project ran, this won the British Wildlife Photography Awards in 2018. And I nearly didn't enter it because I thought I hadn't got there. I critiqued my own images, of course. I said that this has not got a fully enclosed reflection, the noise levels were high. And I talked to one of my mentors and he said, "You've got to be kidding me." He said, get it in now. And I did, and it won. So I was delighted. But again, this is laser triggered, pre-opened shutter, and using infrared floodlights and infrared flash guns, which were all sort of self-manufactured to get this kind of image. So a long project, and I have to say, 14 months from start to get this image, and even then the project wasn't finished.
That's amazing. You've mentioned 2018 or 14 months. How long did it take you to create or develop your fellowship research paper?
I think it's just shy of 3 years in total, but I approached the RPS when the project was conceived and running, and I knew it was viable. So I already had some, let's say, some work in the bank, but then made the proposal, as you've heard, read. And then there was at least another year's worth of work to do, if I recall. It's that sort of, but it's a best part of 3 years end to end.
Wow. And do you think we've spoken about your RAF experience, do you think that helped you in this project? Did you understand?
Oh, without a doubt. I think anybody who's been in any other sort of walk of life will have brought their skills in. I think I could give you a very long list, but I think one that sticks out for me is it's tenacity and not giving up. It's determination, but also excellence. One of the core values of the Royal Air Force is excellence, and it's not letting go until you've achieved what you set out to achieve in the first place. But I think, this tenacity, I can certainly remember one night, not long before that really nice image was taken, the infrared image. I was waist deep in water. I have been for about a week, not continuously, but night after night after night. I had 700 images one night that were black rectangles with nothing on them. And I thought, what the hell are you playing at, Colley? And it was, thought, should I give this up? Is it technically too demanding? And I thought, no, go home, have some sleep, have a few hours kip, have a cup of tea, go back and review your work. And it's this process of review and analyzing, and the Air Force certainly taught me this, critique yourself really hard, analyze what you've done wrong. And it was a simple mathematical error in my calculations for the triggering. And as soon as I fixed that, the images came flooding in. But it was sad because that night I had bats swarming round. The moment was happening and I didn't produce a single image. So I think tenacity you know, and
Yeah.
determination is quite an important quality.
Actually, I've never really thought about this before, but when you said, I asked myself whether I should give up, do you think you should get to that level? Is that, if you don't think that, are you trying hard enough?
Well, that threshold is different for different people, and circumstances are always different. But I think you should be. I mean, I have a rule of thumb about I do a lot of experimental work to try and get the novelty. So I'll try new things, and I keep reminding myself that the road to success has to be littered with 1,000 failures. So you must expect failure on the way. But if you are analyzing and improving and changing direction, and really sort of, you know, keeping to your end goal, but willing to, you know, move and adjust and test as you go, then you will get there. But you should expect failure if you're trying anything difficult or new. It's going to happen.
Lovely, thank you. Can I just take you back to the very beginning? So you would have had a sort of opening question. This is what I'm trying to achieve. Did you also have almost an expected outcome at the beginning of the research project? Did that change?
Yeah, I think it's very important if you're doing a serious project to have that statement at the beginning, Stuart. And it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, but I think setting yourself a goal that will give you the drive, the focus, and the, you know, the initial direction, and let's call it initial direction. Now, I made some, I quickly became apparent at the start of the project that this was not going to work down the path I had imagined, but that doesn't matter. This is where you begin to change, but you're always looking at that long-term goal. And framing long-term goals, I think that there's a little bit of skill in that. But I used to teach a little bit of underwater photography, and I would tell all my students this: I wouldn't let them jump off the back of the boat until they told me what their artistic intent was. So it's really important to have that beginning statement, a goal in mind, and then get yourself set off. But without that, you'll never have the drive, the application, and the focus, I believe, because my students who found this difficult would jump in, and it's like a sweet shop, you know, oh, look, fish, coral, wow. But they're just not driving at doing something that's really excellent or different or new. So it's vital, I think, the start position and the end goal. And it doesn't matter if you get it wrong, you can adjust.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So on this next slide, we're going to look at your team in a way. We mentioned teams earlier on, and this is from your paper. How important in a research project like this is collaboration with others?
Yeah, and we did allude to this earlier. So I could not have done this paper without all of these fabulous people here. And it's a real mix of skills in here. Merlin Tuttle in America is probably one of the world's best known bat photographers. And I thought, well, go to the top and see if and he's brilliant. He's absolutely brilliant. And he was very, very helpful. And he gave me some real shortcuts. But I wanted to do bat photography in a different way to him. But he told me, you know, where not to go because I'd waste time. I'll mention, not everybody, but Bob Fosbury is an RPS member, and Bob has expertise that's fabulous out of space, interestingly, but it's infrared technologies. And he actually told me some amazing stuff after watching an early presentation about this, and I collaborated with him. And again, he gave me knowledge that I couldn't possibly have gleaned that quickly, even through reading. And then a whole range of skills, a lot of ecologists, bat experts. Joe there, Dr. Joe, is you know, in the Bat Conservation Trust, and they as a team themselves, I mean, I eventually ended up working this problem with them because they were very interested in bat-friendly photography. They'd wanted to do this project themselves, were delighted that I seemed to be setting off on the same thing, and they gave me access to sort of resources, particularly ecologists, and a lot of them are named there. And one other I mentioned is my neighbor, Petra, who has language skills. You know, I'm pretty good with the English language, but when you're writing a serious academic quality paper, you need an independent view. You don't see your own mistakes. So she is a language guru and absolutely crawled through this paper before it got anywhere near to the RPS. So yeah, you can't do these things without teams like this.
And I think it's really, really respectful and nice that you've included their names on your paper. This is actually your paper that you handed in. So we've seen some marvellous photography. How much writing was there, and how did you locate research resources?
I think the essence of good writing is being concise, getting your point over in as few words as possible. But this is a depth subject, and there's looking into bat vision, all sorts of things. So it's a lot of writing for sure. But that said, you know, the resources is what you want. So the internet is, you know, it's a huge blessing and a devil. Because there's a lot of bad info out there. So you can try yourself to trawl, and you will get a lot of good info if you're careful about looking at the sources. But actually, if you want really high grade info, you need to go to the universities. You need to begin to pay for the odd research paper. But going back to teams, one of the beauties of working with a team, when they're cheering you on and they want you to help them, you know, the Bat Conservation Trust were brilliant at this. They gave me access to a lot of research papers because a lot of their people have written them. So they said, oh, they really want to show you the stuff and help you along. So actually, I got access to papers I might have had to buy otherwise. But I am willing to buy, you know, a few papers to get some on open source. But actually, it's people that will steer you in to the sources. And they're all interested in the bibliography. But yeah, the internet's fabulous if you're disciplined with it.
Yeah, so it's making friends, isn't it? It's making contacts. So it is a photographic project. It is about photography, and with photography, the artist intent is really important. Can I just ask you to read and refer to this, please?
Yes, I'm just going to have to move the window slightly here because it's covering part of the right. Here we go. So it's trying to jump back in. Okay, I can hold it out the way. So this is the bit I said was really important for me. I never start a project without writing down at the start what my intent is and a desired shot list or image list. So I've written that a precursor to investigating photography methods and the associated technical approaches was a clear definition of artistic intent on the desired image list. So the author's my artistic intent was to create spectacular images of free-flying British bats in a way that others have not, that's the novelty thing, express the bat's speed of movement and their hunting flight paths. And my desired shot list was individual portraits of different bat species on the wing, which is not new, people have done that, but I wanted to start there with high quality images. An expression of the typically frenetic high-speed bat movement during flight, which people hadn't done in two-dimensional images or hadn't done well in my view. And then bats flying within their natural habitat at night, typically near woodland and water, so the subject in context. And bats capturing prey on the wing, typically small insects and moths. And you can't orchestrate this stuff. This is really, really quite difficult. And here's an image, one of my favorite spots, it became a favorite spot, the bat is a soprano pipistrelle. And it's an experimental image. There's no great beauty in this, but it's a sort of work that leads you on to better things. So lots of things happening here. This is an infrared image, and in post-processing, I've deliberately inverted it so black becomes white. So the dark areas are the bright areas in reality on the exposure. And you can see that the foliage, and Bob Fosbury told me a lot about how chlorophyll interacts with infrared, and in fact it fluoresces, would you believe? So if it's close in, it blows out really easily. And this was an easy way of seeing where it's likely to blow out. And you can see where the infrared flash is falling particularly high up on those leaves and in foreground on the right. And likewise, the bat you want to light, it's the main subject. But also I was practicing a strobing technique here, which is firing the flash at a high frequency over a number of cycles. So what are we looking at? 6 cycles you can see here. And you can also see the bat's body is painted in between the individual strobe images. And that's from a constant infrared light, which is also lighting the foreground. So this taught me a lot about analyzing the infrared exposures, and it's very difficult. If you thought night exposures were difficult anyway, I found infrared almost 10 times more difficult to balance this all out, because you can't see it happening until you get something on the back of the camera and in detail, eventually processed in this way. So I did lots of these experimental images, but they have a value in their own right. I mean, it does show a bat flying through its habitat quite nicely.
That's fantastic. So we've spoken a lot about techniques, but of course, as photographers, we love equipment. So you mentioned you developed a lot of equipment. Could you tell us about these, please?
Yeah, this is one of the laser traps, and the red lights you'll see center right, low down, the two red dots. That's a laser light shining out, and the reflected beam that you'll see in the next image. In fact, you'll see a mirror out over the water on the left-hand image, where and you just about see the laser light path on there. So, and I've got one camera in the water, one on the bank oblique. And this is to photograph a particular species of bat, the Debenton's bat that hunts over water. So there's images where you saw they're taking insects off the water surface. I've placed this rig in that area. So this is the pre-opened shutter, flash triggered by a laser crossing. So the camera's pre-focused exactly where the bat is going to cross that laser beam. And then you just got to sit all night and hope one flies through it. Having, of course, spent, as I did, many months observing bat behavior and knowing where they were likely to fly. The image on the right is, sorry, I don't know if we can go back one. I was just going to say is an experimental rig that was looking at a combination of laser and an infrared security floodlight. The interesting thing about this one is the experimental rig was a 12-volt car battery running a 240-volt inverter, all balanced over water at night. Your safety assessments become, and I work solo at night, but I tell you, leads in running in water at night, your habit patterns, your individual habit patterns. One night I dragged the leads and nearly pulled, 5,000 quid worth of gear into the water, let alone the dangers of, getting 240 volts in water. And I've now miniaturized a lot of that, and it runs at 12 volt DC, which is a little bit safer. If you go on to the next one, this is very recent. So again, spurred on by lockdown and the frustrations of not being able to get out and work in my normal areas. I have a brown long-eared bat, a beautiful little creature that flies in the back garden. Only one, and he occasionally makes a pass in between a hedge and a pear tree. I just sat out and watched him. So I just sketched out this idea. It was a laser grid in a frame to sit by the pear tree there. And on its very first, and it's bidirectional. So I had time on my hands here in lockdown to look at it working to catch head-on shots, whichever way the bat flew through. And it worked the very first night out. It got a beautiful in-focus head-on shot of my little brown long-eared bat. So all that experience had come together and let me to fairly quickly run that little rig very successfully.
It's really great fun. Now, if I'd like to invite everybody, if you've got questions, which are starting to come in already, Paul. I think we could be here all night, but our time is nearly up. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a little chat bubble. If you've got a question, please send it through to Andy Moore, and he will pass them over to me. But before we get there, I don't think this is your first successful distinction on research. I think you did your associate with this book, your associate research, Paul. Could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, yes, I did. I wanted to do a series. It was my second book. I did a sort of, just to get used to working with a publisher, did let's say a low risk venture, the first one. It was just a small A5 size book, but I wanted to make sure I was going to be able to work with a good publisher close to where I live, and it worked brilliantly. So I worked with Alex on this particular book. And this was about, again, I was looking for, there are lots of books about how to do underwater photography, but it was not that. This was about the artistic side of it. So I researched what's been done very well topside above water, which is to look at composition and try and translate it into how that might work underwater. And it's not quite as easy as you think, because underwater, technically underwater, it's a different game with some key different thoughts and skills that are required. But then try to mash all the two together, and it created quite a nice little niche, and it's still knocking out royalties for me. So it was a really good project. I really enjoyed it, but it's about the artistic approach to underwater photography.
Wow, that looks really amazing. So I think, as I say, we could talk all night, but I think we need to move on and look at what you're doing outside of these distinctions. I think you're working with quite a few conservation organizations.
Yeah, actually, Stuart, this is my main reason for it's what drives my photography is conservation. So I've worked with all these agencies shown here and many more. in fact, but I've had particular successes. Fauna and Flora International commissioned me to go to Cambodia and create a portfolio of 300 images in 3 different habitats, basically seagrass, coral reefs, and mangroves, to show the good and the bad of what was going on there, to help make the case for a marine protected area. And it succeeded, and that marine protected area now exists. It's been in place for 2 years. I want to go back there 10 years downstream and see if it looks as good as Missoula, because that will make me profoundly happy to have really been involved in that. The Blue Marine Foundation is a fabulous UK-based organisation, and I did some work in Ascension Island with them, and I'm still working with them. And again, it's a marine protected area, created the biggest in the Atlantic Ocean, and I was very happy to provide imagery support for that. We've talked about the bat work, and I work directly with the Bat Conservation Trust and continue to try and help the plight of bats. And I don't want to score any political points at all here, but in an environment where we might be talking about build, wildlife is under threat, and bats in particular. Their habitat's been absolutely threatened, and we need a balanced view, and imagery helps in this sort of thing. And I've done a lot of river work, so yeah, this drives me. I have a real purpose to my wildlife photography in particular. It's conservation.
That's amazing. So it's really quite a massive world that you move in, and I think that on those first slide we saw that in 2002 your local newspaper compared you to Tom Cruise in the film Top Gun. What I've heard tonight, I could imagine Tom Cruise actually playing you as the photographer in a future film. I think we'll have to send this recording to him. You've got something to request from our viewers, I believe, to do with conservation. Yeah,
I would just exhort everybody. Imagery to support conservation is quite important, and I would think that many photographers have got lots of great images, and they don't have to be beautiful images of beautiful things. Everybody strives towards that, but it's the rubbish. Plastic has been well done, but many other aspects of conservation, overfishing is one particular concern of mine. But I just wonder how many hard drives people have got, images that agencies might be able to use. And I could say, send them to me, but I think that would be a bit ridiculous. What I would exhort you to do in an area, where we wonder whether central government might have the capacity, because of all they're having to do at the moment, to look after this. I go to local agencies. This is how I work now. I do work with international agencies, but there can be nothing stronger than really giving the motivation to work with your local borough council, for example. So I did a lot of work with the Tess Valley Borough Council about littering in rivers, and I just give them the imagery, and I've done special imagery for them that they've commissioned me to do. But if you've got imagery that if it's a litter, good stuff and bad stuff, we need to tell good stories as well as the bad. But if it's conservation relevant and you think that will be helpful, just look around what's happening in your local area in conservation sort of moves, and it's sometimes just parish councils, borough councils. They can do an awful lot, and they're normally crying out for this stuff, and they're not well funded for it. And give it to them. Say, hey, could you use this? They might say no, they might say yes, but my experience is they'll normally welcome you with open arms.
That's a really valuable request. Thank you. Paul, thank you ever so much for everything you've shared tonight. We're now going to go on to questions from our audience. And the first one is from Dave of Norfolk, who would like to know whether you would do another fellowship with the Royal Photographic Society in research or something else.
I probably wouldn't do a research one. This has been such almost invest your life in these things. But I am interested in doing another one, interestingly, David. But what I'd probably do, because both, as it turned out, and it wasn't engineered this way, I did my licentiateship in the classic way, just a portfolio of images. I thought it would be the same for my A and F, but actually research interested me, and I've suddenly perhaps missed out on the chance of exhibiting, a really strong image or portfolio of images. Now, it exists within my bat work, that portfolio is there, but I'd love to do something else. So I'll probably do a traditional, if that's the way of describing it, second fellowship. It does interest me, and it will probably, I mean, space interests me. So if the space stuff goes well, I'd love to do something there if I can find something different to do. So yes, is the answer.
And when you're working on a project, Paul. Do you focus purely on that one project, or are you working on more than one at the same time?
No, I normally have three on the go, three major projects on the go, and often it's weather that drives that because, and a mix of overseas. I try to minimize my overseas travel for good environmental reasons, but there's a mix of juggling overseas commitments and home commitments, but also weather. And often when it's not fit to do one type, so we haven't got perfectly clear skies, which you need for astrophotography, you can often be doing something else. So I don't want to be ever sat doing nothing. It's my worst nightmare, boredom. I've never been bored in my life and I never want to be. So I will normally have three projects on the go. But there are other reasons for that. Things can fall through. So some projects where you need external support, sometimes that can fall through. And you want to rapidly switch your effort into something else without missing a heartbeat. So always got three on the go minimum.
Fantastic. I've been asked what sort of infrared camera you use.
I just have modified cameras, so I use two at the moment. I tried lots of different things. I started out with narrow band, so modified D750, both full frame, and a D800E, one high resolution, one with the bigger pixels. The one with the bigger pixels actually seems to be more sensitive to infrared light, doing better. And I started out trying to work in very narrow band with worries about sharp focusing. Actually, I needn't have worried. I've now converted both cameras away from narrowband. One was about 750, if people know the infrared spectrum, 750 nanometers. One, I think, was 800 plus. Yep. I now work full spectrum cameras, so they've got quartz filters on them, the same two cameras, took off the infrared bandpass filters, put on full spectrum filters. They see all light, but at night, there's not much there. And then I tune the light that I emit from both the infrared floodlights and the flashlights. You just put filters over the flashes. So that's how I work it. Full spectrum cameras, regular cameras modified. You can modify just about any camera. There are lots of people that will do that for you.
Thank you. And is it just still photography you do, or do you ever video moving bats?
No, I do video bats quite a lot at the request of. I don't, sometimes for documentary work, because it's nice to show video and what you're doing, but the request of the Bat Conservation Trust, or more correctly, through the Bat Conservation Trust, I went to work with the Wiltshire Bat Group, and I still work with them. It's my local group, great bunch of people doing amazing conservation work. They asked if I'd do some videography of a infrared of a very rare, very sensitive bat called the barbastelle, and we found a maternity roost. And as luck would have it, I've managed to film a female barbastelle bat, which is, these bats are really under threat, carrying its pup in flight. So that was quite a bit of luck, but I was really glad that I went on that bit of work with them. So yeah, I've got that up on Facebook somewheres. It's relatively rare footage.
You've got a very active Facebook presence, which is excellent. I've got a lot of the information tonight off your Facebook page. Somebody's asked about lighting positions for bat photography. Is that a straightforward answer?
It's a complex thing. So I try, when I'm scouting and trying ideas, I'll often just put a camera on flash and trigger it directly, or even hand hold it. If I'm have a long shutter dwell, I'll sort of open the shutter, wait for a bat to fly through, and then hand trigger the flash, often using a strobe. But what I'm doing some work this Friday in Somerset with a brown long-eared bat at the request of a friend, a ecologist friend. And I'll be using 4 flash guns, 1 master, 3 slaves, all infrared, and strobing, and they'll be on light stands. And I will be varying the position of those. They're all on tight beams because I want to light the bats, which I haven't got time to describe all the likely behavior, but I want 4 very tight beams that will light the bats only, and not so much on the foliage, because I'll have a distant way back. I'll be gently flooding infrared light into the area, which will pick out the buddleia bush where these bats are coming to hunt moths. So lighting, it varies enormously, and you need to, as with all photography, light is everything. Infrared light is the same. You just can't see it so easily at the time because it's invisible to our eyes. So you have to go to the back of the camera and or a computer screen, and I often slave the camera to a computer screen in the field so that I can get a decent look at how the lighting is going. It's very easy to blow out the highlights with infrared lighting.
Lovely, thank you. Now I'm going to read this question out very carefully because it's a legal question. This is from one of our viewers who's been photographing bats using pre-focused high ISO and flash at a 16th of AM. That would be a second, would it? Am I breaking the law, do you know?
No. Particularly if you're not, you shouldn't be doing this near a roost. And providing that this is bats just flying around your house or out in the open, no, you're not. Then this is exactly one of the problems I started with. So high ISO, low manual power, never use, I'd exhort people if you're going to try this, don't use your flash in auto, because it will go to maximum at night, or as in through the lens type settings. So manual 1/16 or below, I try to get down to 1/28 if I can. So it's low light power and less likely to disturb the bat. But actually I've got lots of anecdotal now, and my paper kind of shows this through the research, that setup will not disturb the bats. And the best indicator is, if you start photographing bats that are flying around the house and they stop flying around the house, you're probably disturbing them and you ought to rethink what you're doing. But no, my instinct is that's not illegal.
Thank you.
The roost thing is very important, I should say. If you're trying to photograph them flying out of their roost space, that would be illegal.
Thank you.
Unless you're with a conservationist.
Yeah. Is there going to be a book on bats? Paul Colley.
There was going to be, actually. I was going to do sadly, all these plans have fallen apart. But there was to have been a major exhibition and a book launch this year in London. I've had to shelve that, and because of the way things have panned out, I've lost the window with that particular publisher. Yeah. But I think the work is coming on, and the answer's almost certainly, because it's part written.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've just got time for one last question, which is taking us back to the astrophotography. How do you manage to avoid satellite trails in your astro photos?
It's really difficult. You can plan, because actually satellites are very predictable. But you know, Elon Musk and his wretched constellations of satellites, really interesting to watch them, but I don't know if you've seen these things. Constellations of satellites now come through the sky at night. Very cool to look at and watch, but actually they wreak havoc with astro images, and a lot of frames get spoiled. So you can plan. There are lots of astro tools, and these you can tell to the second where they're going to be and when. So you just need to bring that into your planning. It's getting harder and harder with all these things going through. But the other thing you can do is you're taking lots of subframes, and provided you break your exposure down, the thing not to do is a 3-hour-long single exposure. You'll be knackered without a doubt. So what you do is you break it down into 90 seconds, maybe 3 minutes per exposure, and then you review each sub frame. And if a satellite has gone through, you can just carve it out. So it's a combination of planning and judicious selection of subframes.
Thank you, Paul. Do you know, this has been amazing. I've loved doing the research for this. I've loved doing this interview. You've been very, very open. Thank you ever so much for your time. Is there anything you'd like to say at the end of the evening?
Well, I'd just like to say thanks to the RPS, actually. It's been part of my inspiration, actually. When I started out in photography, and I think of my L days when I was nervously sort of getting into underwater photography, it's a great help to belong to these groups. And and I still do, look at some of the presentations, listen to other photographers. It's still my constant source of inspiration. The RPS has been part of that. So thank you to the RPS, the distinction staff who do all the drudge behind the scenes, which is so vital to making these things happen. I know we've got Andy listening now, but you know, this stuff doesn't happen with all that background work from you guys. So thank you to you, and to all the folks listening. You know, I hope there's a little bit of inspiration in there. Tenacity is the big thing. You know, get yourself a goal and keep driving it out. Don't be put off by people. Don't be put off by failure. And my final bit, let's say, is experiment. Don't be afraid to play around and expect failure, but you'll be amazed what you might stumble across just by mucking around and trying different ideas, and you might be the first in the world to do something.
Paul, thank thank you ever so much. I hope you've enjoyed tonight as well.
I have.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank Jonathan Vaines and Andy Moore for all their technical help, and also to Peter Hayes. Now, Peter and Andy came up with the concept of these talks, and we are coming to the end of this year's season. We will be starting again, and I'd like to hand over now to Peter Hayes to wrap the season up, please. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart, and a huge thank you to Paul for what really was a fascinating discussion. And as Stuart says, we will be back in the autumn with some more talks, and we'll be featuring one of the most experienced wildlife photographers around, Sue Flood, FRPS. They'll be talking about the Arctic, the Antarctic, great white sharks, and her years working with David Attenborough on Blue Planet and Planet Earth. And then we have Jane Hilton, FRPS, that's not her by the way, who spent a year in 2 brothels in Nevada, the only American state with legalized prostitution. It's a fascinating documentary study with stills and films she made for the BBC. And also signed up is Simon Roberts, Honorary FRPS, one of Britain's foremost contemporary photographers. His work deals with our relationship to landscape and notions of identity and belonging. He was also the official British election artist for the 2010 general election. But before all that, we have 3 digital roadshows. We can't take prints around the country as we usually do to show you, so we're doing it online. For the first 3 weeks of September, we'll be covering all 3 levels of distinctions with Zoom events, everything you need to know. And of course, you will be able to ask questions. We'll have successful applicants talking about their images, and panel members and panel chairs explaining what you need to do. And it's on twice a day to cater for overseas photographers, plus anyone who prefers to watch in the morning. And one last thing, our membership offer is still open until the end of July. So if you'd like to join us, there's 20% off the membership fee for you. And if you recommend someone else to join, not only do they get the discount, you get 3 months free membership. So thank you very much to everyone who's joined us for this season of Distinctions Talks Live. We started them because of lockdown, but now they are part of the landscape. We will be back. Goodbye from everyone at the Royal Photographic Society.